Good morning,
Hello,
Prof.
good
Hello.
morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, how are you? Good
Yeah.
morning, my Carol.
Morning, Cara. Good morning. Good morning,
Yes,
Toby. Cara.
It's our man. Morning, man.
Yeah.
Doctor,
yeah,
yeah, so the live stream is on
okay,
YouTube, just in case. So once it's 8, you can start recording to cloud. I think we should have spoken.
oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Hello, welcome. And compliments of the season. I've not.
In the same, thank you. Good morning and compliment of the season. Welcome to the fourth session of our research ethics class. This morning we'll be discussing ethical consideration in research, a conversation that's actually already started on the WhatsApp group. Prof will be taking us through this session. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I think it was informed consent. It was an error. I wrote that, yes.
Informed consent. Ethical informed consent.
Yeah, just let me, I don't know why that keeps coming up. Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and compliments of the season. Welcome to our very last session for this 4 weeks training. We had a very late discussion around informed consent, with most of our discussion happening this morning. I think that was a lot on my part. Actually, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why this one keeps coming up. Please give me a minute just to sort the slide issue. Okay. Thank you. So we had a late discussion around informed consent, and believe me, informed consent is huge. I don't think if we open up the space for 1 year, we would not always keep coming back to informed consent. Even globally, informed consent is still being discussed. And to also acknowledge that it's an evolving process, knowing that context matters for informed consent, appreciating that informed consent and bioethics as a whole was fathered by the United States, but now there's more and more interest in decolonization and context-specific actions. And so you're seeing the discussions around informed consenting as a part of bioethics evolving as more and more understanding of what decolonization is all about. I think also within our context, you also have to think around informed consent more and more and improve its application. Like I did note in one of the past lectures, informed consent in Africa at Edvald, proud to the activities of some of our fathers in bioethics, there was nothing like a third-party consent. But now there's a recognition that there's important third parties, significant third parties that can give consent, that will have to be involved in the consenting process, not necessarily take over the autonomy of the individuals in giving consent. For example, we do know that in African context, the place of the community is very significant. And therefore, before you go into a community to do a research, you have to get permission from the community leaders. So you go into a community, you explain what you want to do. The leader allows you permission to come in. And this permission is not just verbal, but documented, where they write and sign that we allow you permission. Permission does not automatically mean consent, but it allows you, is the first step to get into wherever you want to do. In my own institution, for example, if you want to go and work within the community, my ethics committee in the hospital, we ask you to go get permission from the local government, a written permission before they even process consent. So permission is important. That's a recognition of the place of the third party. Also to note, beyond that discussion, that with the evolution of ethics, the assent in communities where the husband is very important, the assent of the husband, even in writing, assent, when we talk about assent, is not verbal, it's about a written thing. You develop the consent assent form fully, and there's a signature to it because it's also a legal document. Informed consent documents also are legal documents. So you have a recognition of the place of the husband, and you get the husband to assent while the participant, who is the woman, consent. Within this third party space where the husband is assenting, the assent of the husband does not supersede the consent of the wife. So it's the wife's consent that you act upon. So the husband can say, no, I don't want you to participate as assent. But the wife says, yes, I want to participate. The consent of the wife supersedes the assent of the husband. But then I would appreciate, I'm sure that whoever is the PI of that study will appreciate the complexity of that when there's a discord between the informed consent of the wife and the assent of the husband. And if I am the PI, when my manual of operating procedure would rather ask that when that happens, there must be efforts to reconcile both before going on, because you won't want to have a woman who, because of your research, is now sent out of the home. So you want to resolve that before you go on to recruit the participant. But please note that in such a place, the assent of the woman, the consent of the man supersedes the assent of the man. But when it comes to permission is not automatic consent for all participants in the community. The fact that the community says you have permission to come in does not mean you shouldn't do the things around assenting and consenting amongst the community members. We'll be talking about this further in our group discussion, that there's no place like group consenting. You cannot give group consenting. You can't collect a number of people together and then give them information about the research and then say, do you agree? And then you say, agree. No, you can give group information, but assent and consenting is a one-to-one thing. I repeat, it's a one-to-one thing done in privacy. It's a one-to-one thing. Privacy means that it is just you and the person you're consenting that is in the place, so that there's nothing around the person that might influence a decision otherwise. So consenting is done in a private space, one-on-one, and the person can ask questions and not just give you answers because the presence of other persons are influencing the response. Before I go on to the summary, just to note that there's also another place where you take assent, and that's for children in Nigeria, children 12 to 17 years old. And that's because there is understanding that they have cognitive development enough to be able to appreciate the risk and benefits you are talking about, and therefore can take a decision. It's because their legal age does not make them independent. That is why they give assent. And please know that assent is not a checkbox, it's a full form, which is oftentimes shorter than the main consent form, but with all the details that ought to be there. You would note that I've written, if you keep counting, it's 8 minimum consents that should be in a consent form. When it is there, they sign. And then when you have assent, the parents also sign. In this case, unlike the husband and wife thing, when it comes between a child and a mother or a parent or the carer or the legal authorized representative, please note that the assent of the child supersedes the consent of the parent or legal authorized representative. I repeat, unlike that of a husband and a wife, where the consent of the wife supersedes the assent of the husband, or whatever it is, it might be partners, it might not always be husband and wife. In our environment, it's usually husband and wife that has the superiority of old. Unlike that which happens between husband and wife, for the child and parent, the assent of the child supersedes the consent of the parent. So the parent might consent that this child participate. Once your child does not assent to participate, you cannot continue to recruit the child into study. Please note that the consent form of the parents does not give assent to the child. So once you want to assent the child also must have a form that says about you. If a parent wants to consent for the child, the parent has to have the form that says, very well notes you are consenting for the child. And so the language reflects you're consenting for the child. And if the parent is an independent person that is also being recruited, the parent also has an independent form. I'll go straight to the summary of the things we've done so far. Once again, it was a last engagement. I completely apologize. It was my fault. I should have engaged a lot earlier. So there are 2 major things that came out of our discussions majorly today. Issues around ethical consideration in research when it comes to informed consenting process, and the responsibility of the researchers when it comes to the informed consenting process. So let's consider 3 things that we need to look at when we're thinking about ethical consideration in research when it has to do with informed consent. First is the consent process. I like this to note that it is a process. It is a process. However, once it is a one-off research, like we do with questionnaire studies, cross-sectional studies, we must appreciate that even though it's a one-off process, participants must be able to have the time to ask questions. Okay, so you must give details. Remember the 8 details at a minimum. For the person and the consent, it's a one-on-one thing, then they can engage, ask questions. Even when they don't ask questions, you as a researcher must ask probing questions to be able to be sure that they have understood the things that you discussed with them. So after you have question no, then ask probing questions. Probing questions to ensure that the key elements of your research, of the content of the research are understood. Once your questioning shows that there's a gap in knowledge and understanding, you repeat the consenting process, even though it's a one-off thing, before the sign. Why do I say this? Please note that if for any reason they go to courts and they can prove that they did not understand what you said, you are liable in court, I repeat. If for any reason a participant goes to court and can prove that they did not understand what you said, you are liable. That is why many people have even advocated that the consenting should be understood consent, not just informed consent. Informed consent seems to connote that you provide information, whereas informed consent is about ensuring the understanding of what the participant is involved with. And therefore, you take only that signature after there is evidence that there's an understanding. So that is why you say, you ask them, you allow them to provide us questions, and you yourself also assess that there's an understanding. All right, so when we're talking about the process, it's about detailed discussion. I like the word discussion. We're discussing with the participants on why consent is crucial. And in IRIS research, like we had in the case study, remember that there was one additional element to the 8. You have to provide some level of information about the study products that is going into the body of the study participants. They have to know that. Many times if you go to high-income countries, and informed consent could be as long as 100, 30 pages, 40 pages, because they want to be detailed enough to cover their back legally. But in this country, the Health Research Code says that a consent form should not be longer than 12 pages, I think. Either 8 pages or 12 pages, there's a length at maximum so as to allow for absorption. But it also means that the participant can go home with this document and study it with families and other persons that they think is relevant. Please note that the consenting process is a respect for participants' autonomy and allow the participant to have an informed decision-making, so they have enough information to take a decision whether I'm participating or not. It's respecting the patient's autonomy, which also recognizes that the person can choose not to participate without consequences. I repeat, the individual may choose not to participate without undue consequences. So the fact that I do not participate does not mean that what otherwise should come to me, I am denied of it. For example, if I'm recruited in a hospital by my doctor, the fact that I did not participate in the doctor's research does not mean I should not have access to my full complement of care. Many patients are usually concerned about this, so they consent without even reading the consent form. So as ethics committee, you must divide that responsibility so that there's no unnecessary coercion into the process. For clinical trials, which is what we brought up, you find that clinical trials are usually long. They might be there recruiting participants, engaging with participants for 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years. There's some researches that is going on for 5 years. And participants have to keep coming in more than once. This is where we talked about the process. Even though you have spent a long time at the very beginning recruiting participants, doing the consenting, and allowing them to sign. Every time they come, you must repeat, not the signing, but the information sharing. There's a minimum information sharing, not as long as what you did, and continue to ask them if they still understand, and get them to verbally say, yes, I want to continue before you continue. And, in your own record, you would have recorded, in your clinical, when you do clinical trials, you have your records, you would record that you have done this verbal consent and they had agreed to continue. If during that process, the questions they want to ask, they are also given another opportunity along the research to ask those questions. They must always be given the opportunity, knowing very well that it's only doing the informed consent that the participant has the place to be able to engage directly with decision making around the research. So it's an iterative process for longitudinal studies like clinical trials. And that iterative process allows you to accommodate study changes, anything that changes doing the research, anything that changes during the research, then you would have to redo the consent. For example, a new therapy comes up, you say you do not know, but now you know something, then you must do the consent again and allow them to consent again by written documentation. Or for example, let me give you an example. At the time you recruited the participant was 17, and then by 1 year later, the participant is 18. Remember, you collected assent at that time. Now the participant is 18, then you would now want to change this to proper consent. So these are kind of things that makes it a process. It's not a one-off thing, and then you feel, oh, you're done when you are conducting longitudinal studies. Please note that there are other ethical considerations, and I'm sure you must have engaged with this when you are doing research, is about the cultural appropriateness and linguistic appropriateness of your study participation. Consenting, like one of us noted on the discussion, is about adapting the process to participants' literacy level and local language to ensure understanding. It is only when you understand that you can say, yes, I truly consent to participate. I'll reiterate also the issue about literacy level as much as possible. Every consent, even if you are working with your research participants are all professors of English literature. Please know that the consent form cannot have a language that is higher than a GSS 3 level of understanding. It must be as simple and plain as this. You can't use any kind of jargon in a consent process. It must be as simple enough for a GSS 3 person in Nigeria to understand, even if you are recruiting professors. However, if you're recruiting a person that is 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, the literacy in that place must be appropriate for that age. So I hope we understand the adaptation of the literacy level. Please also appreciate that whatever you do, you must study the study environment and understand the languages used in that environment and develop your consent form in the local language. So for example, you're working in Lagos. You do know that in Lagos is a major cosmopolitan town. And so you find Hausas, Igbos, and Yoruba in that community. Please translate your English informed consent to Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. And when you meet the appropriate person, you use it. If you, for example, find one or two ethnic persons who doesn't speak Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, I will add also in a place like Lagos, you change it to broken English. So that's Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, and broken English in addition to your full English, because most people will speak broken English. So, but if you come across an ethnic person who don't understand all this, and they're just one or two, then you can get a translator to do that. Of course, appropriately documenting what this is. But if by the time you're meeting 3, 4 ethnic persons, you must have a consent form that also addresses ethnic persons. So these are the considerations, ethical considerations that you must get approval for that translation. And when you're sending up translations to ethics committees for approval, you must change the English to the language and back translate. I repeat, you change it to the English to the language and back translate the language back to English, and you submit the 3 documents so that there's evidence to show that the one in the language is exactly or as close as possible to the initial English that was translated. Usually when you submit to the ethics committee, you do not only submit, you must also submit along with the certificate of translation, which shows that you actually had an expert in the language who actually translated. Okay, so those are the requirements. And the ethics committee will usually write in their certificate that they give to you that you must use the consent that they approved. So that when you go to the field, you will find that it is IRB approved, must be on that consent, okay, on that consent form before you administer it to the community. It must be the approved version, be it the translated or not. The headache with being in the field with the English and getting somebody to translate is the inconsistency in the translation. The inconsistency, the risk of inconsistency in translation is high when you're having somebody translate for you in the field over time. And once there's inconsistency of translation, you cannot assume that there's a consistency of information provision. All right. So that's the thing about language. And once again, once you're given the consent, it's a form, you must tell the participants about what the purpose is, to raise the benefit, the reimbursement. Even when you're not giving reimbursement, you say you're not giving reimbursement. The freedom to be able to exit the trial at any time if you do have conditions that it needs to be involved with the withdrawal, the participants must know, and contact details must be provided. Usually the contact detail of the IRB that gave you approval is one of the 2 or 3 or 4 that you want to, because participants may want to ask questions or engage without you, the researchers, doing or after the research. So this information, so in Nigeria, there's a minimum of 8, and I share this minimum content with you on the platform. Once again, must be jargon-free and suitable for individuals with JSS3 understanding. Finally, please note that it is the researcher's responsibility to ensure there's ethical compliance, including the fact that participants have the right to opt out at any time. You might have procedures for opt-out, but at any time they can leave, they can discontinue. There must be nothing in the research that forces them to stay on against their will. And once again, once things are developing during the trial, be diligent enough to reconsent the participants. In clinical trials, also one of the biggest problems, and I continue to see it existing even until now, is therapeutic misconceptions. When you have people in trials where you have therapies that definitely you do not know about the efficacy of the drug, but people come onto the trial, you provide it free, they assume that the drug that you're giving them is working. They would even come with you with symptoms and tell you how all the troubles of their life is gone. This is called therapeutic misconception. And it is very, very, very prominent in low-income countries. I've done about 3 different research where I had gone back to engage with research participants after being consented to participate in research. And this keeps recurring. It is a problem in our community because people don't understand about trials. They are not educated about this. It is our responsibility as researchers and ethics committees to continuously engage our community and train them about research. But therapeutic misconception is a big deal. And that is why that consenting must have clear communication about the experimental nature of the trial, the unknown efficacy of the trial data. And you must keep reiterating this every time. You must keep reiterating this. This is the information sharing that happens after the major consenting process. One of the things that I remember, I was involved in a trial very early. And then somebody tells you that I recruited 14, 20 participants in a day. Straight. Nobody needs to tell you the consenting process cannot have been good. You cannot recruit 40, 50. You can't even recruit 10 in a day if you are doing clinical trials. You usually recruit about 4 or 5. And that's excellent recruitment process because the consenting process itself will take you at least 30 minutes. Not to talk about 1 hour. Some takes as long as 1 hour because even if this person doesn't, you have to keep engaging. You have to keep asking questions and enabling the person understand every element of the consenting process. So you have a research team that is recruiting 14, 20, 40 persons a day. The consenting process cannot be appropriate, especially when you're dealing with clinical trials. So, and the big deal once again for us is this therapeutic misconception. I cannot overstate it. Many times people low literate people, when they're involved in drug trials, they assume that you're giving them a drug that is working. You must disabuse this notion by continuously providing the information. You might find out that it's the first visit that you understand this. Hey, what did you say? You said what I'm taking. You don't even know that whether it's working or not. It might be the fourth visit, not the first time, that it finally sinks about what you're talking about. On that note, I'll keep quiet. That's the summary of the engagement we had on the platform. I don't know if there are any issues, any questions, any clarifications.
Yes,
Before
ma'am,
we go on to the meet with the date. Okay.
we have a question on the chat box
Okay,
from
please go
Martin. Okay, it reads thus: kindly explain why we need a new consent when a new therapy is available. That wasn't available before commencement of the present study. The alternative therapy is not the subject of the study.
Excellent question. Please note that when you're doing therapeutics, you will let the participant know about alternative therapies. Once I'm doing the malaria, please note that this drug is not, there are other effective drugs for malaria. For example, that case we had where you're looking at this option for the management of malaria, they must know that, look, there are other options. They don't have to be in the trial. If a new drug is developed, so you are told them that there are other options, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now there's a sixth. You consented them understanding there were 5 options. Now you have to reconsent them understanding that there's a sixth option. Even if that is not part of it, it's a malaria drug, its efficacy is exactly like what I'm doing or is related, I must inform. Of course, if there's a new antibiotics, that's not about consenting. There's no antibiotics, doesn't have to do with my own trial. But if a new drug, malaria drug, happens, I must inform them that is a new malaria drug. And that is new information. And so the consenting process must be redone. You have documented the old one, it's still in the file. But you will do, again, a new one with a new information. But this time, remember that this is a new consent. You must get first approval because it's the protocol modification. You must first go to ethics committee, get a protocol modification, and then the consent form that they have approved is what you would not re-administer in the reconsenting process. I hope this is clear. Over.
Thank you very much. We have one hand up, so I think Shegun Babaleye, please, you can unmute.
Good morning, ma. Yes, my question. Good morning, ma. Yes, ma. My question is, if, for example, you collect a consent form from a patient, you collect his data, and the questionnaire and everything. Later on, you collect whether the blood samples or any samples from the patient, and the patient now later said he or she is not interested. After when all those data have been collected, what can someone do?
Excellent question. There are 2 ways to go about it. If when I collected, for example, in a questionnaire survey, where I collected anonymously and I never collected the ID, nor can I link the ID of a person with the data, then I would let the participants will have to know that, yes, you can. What happens is that forward you cannot go, but I am unable to identify your details and I can't extract it because it was anonymized. And please note, you would have already reported in the informed consent that you are collecting anonymized data. You remember your confidentiality and privacy information, you would have informed them that it's anonymized data that you are collecting. If, however, it's a clinical trial, you do not collect anonymized data in clinical trial, you collect data with patient's name. Because it's a longitudinal study and you want to continue to keep track of the information of the patient. The only thing that happens in that process is that their data sheet does not contain their name. There's a separate logbook that is secured very securely under lock and key that links the name with the number. So their clinical trial file number would be 001 without the details of their name, phone contact, house residence, blah, blah, blah. The logbook will say, number 1 is Veronica Okong, who is in Obafemi Awolowo University, and this is her phone number and her residential address. And that detail is under lock and key. If at the 4th visit, I now say, I don't understand this thing. I'm just understanding that at the end of the day, I won't make money out of this. I thought this was a money-making venture. And the people that told me in my village said, this is a way to make money. I'm not doing it. Because you can track me. After, if I say that, you keep asking me, encouraging me, and I say, no. I'm not doing. I came here for a wrong reason. You can track. And therefore, all my information, that's my file, you now put on that lock, and all my blood samples and data you extract, and you cannot use it further for the research, including the fact that once it's extracted, it's also destroyed. Okay. Does that make
Thank
sense?
you, ma. Yes, ma. Thank you, ma.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, ma. There's another question from Ofem Oko. He asks that, what shall we do if at any time one or two of our participants died during the process of the research?
Well, if one of two of your participants that's major, that's a serious adverse event. Two things. Immediately the event happens, you must document and ensure that if it's a clinical trial, that it is or is not related to your clinical trial. 1, 2, this is a serious adverse event that must be reported within 48 hours to the study sponsor, as well as the ethics committee. They would also want to investigate that the death is not related to the clinical trial. If it is related to the clinical trial, that becomes, maybe side effects, and you want to be able to understand what the risk versus the benefits are in this kind of clinical trial. If it's not related, every single thing is documented. The death, what happens, the investigation, and the decisions about continuing or not. The ethics committee, based on the assessment of the relationship between the death as well as the sponsors as concerned in this investigation around the reasons of the death will be documented, but also more importantly, the DSMB, Data Safety and Monitoring Board, that would have been set up for the trial would be informed. If the death is occurring and they might want to have an emergency meeting, they would then take a decision. It's the DSMB that would now take a decision whether to continue with the trial or not, based on the record of death. 2 deaths on the trial is major. I can tell you that, especially if it is now found to be directly related to the drug therapy. So an emergencies DSMB, Data Safety and Monitoring Board meeting may happen. When you do clinical trials, there's a third monitoring body. 1, the DSMB and the ethics committee would monitor the research. 2, the sponsors, the people that gave him money, will also set up their own independent monitoring system to come and monitor the research so that you are sure that everything you're doing is right and the data you're generating is also right. 3rd, the research team, along with the sponsors, will set up a Data Safety and Monitoring Board that continues to monitor the trial, and their eyes is on the adverse events happening to be sure that the risk continues to outweigh, the benefit continues to outweigh the risk. Once they see that the adverse event is a lot more severe than the benefits that the trial would incur, they might stop the trial. They usually would stop the trial. They would also stop the trial if they find out that you have already achieved the results. If you plan to recruit 300 patients and by 250 you have achieved the results, you don't need to expose the other 50 to the adverse events that the research always has. Remember the last research, we talked that there's no research free of risk. There's only minimal, moderate or severe risk. So if at 250 the results of the trial is answered, why expose another 50 so they can also stop that research? 3rd, they might also find that before your 300 that look, this is futility. Whether you reach the end or not, there will be no answer. It's possible the statistician is always on the DSMB looking at these things, that this is a futile trial. There is no answer. You don't get an answer. They can also stop the trial midstream. So these 3 sets of people would have to receive information about deaths on the trial. And part of the thing where compensation is appropriate, you might have in your manual of operating procedures how you deal with deaths and the compensation that would otherwise come with patients that you did. Sorry, I saw that my internet was unstable. And the compensation that you would give with death if death occurs. Please know that clinical trial is a major thing. Anybody doing clinical trial with their out-of-pocket expense is telling a lie because it's major. There are too many things that has to be put in place for a clinical trial. And you can't afford it with your salary. You must get a grant to put everything in place. You heard me talk about manual of operating procedure. It's a whole book in itself that talks about every step. If you put 2 drops of this is what is happening. If you put 3 drops, it's a whole book in itself. Apart from the protocol, apart from everything that goes with it. I hope I answered the question. Over.
Thank you, Ma. I think there was a hand up. I don't know if it's okay. Samson Okuleye. Please go ahead and unmute. Okay, if Samson Okuleye is not coming on, let me pick some questions. Okay, there is a question on the chat box. Can data of participants who withdrew halfway into a trial be included in data analysis? I think you answered that.
Yes, once a participant says, I'm not continuing, please withdraw my data, you withdraw the data, it cannot be included. And that is why when you do clinical analysis, there are 2 different types of analysis, per protocol and intent to treat analysis. So these are all things that take cognizance of those things. Per protocol analysis is different from intent to treat analysis. So I won't go into that, but all those things are addressed. And please also appreciate that once you did your sample size calculation, you already took note of this kind of things, the withdrawals. So you have adjusted the numbers to take care of the withdrawals, to take care of the loss to follow-up, and you must have studied the environment to be able to determine what is appropriate. You don't just say, oh, loss to follow-up is 10%, when you know in your own environment, the loss to follow-up is as high as 40%. So these are the context-specific understanding that you have before you design your trial. So it otherwise shouldn't underpower your study if you have done the appropriate thing. But once again, if the participants withdraw halfway in a trial, a clinical trial, you have to exclude their data from data analysis. If it's a blinded, like an epidemiological study where you do not know who is who and you cannot withdraw, you would have explained to them at that process that it can't be withdrawn. And it's true that we can't. It's not that you're lying. It was anonymized at the time I was collecting, so I can't withdraw that. Thank you. Over.
Okay, Ma, we still have some questions there. We need to go for the case discussion, but let me just speak some of them, then we'll probably come back to them. So the first one here, Luke Oga is wanting to know that since the bulk of consent, understanding of consent is a verbal conversation, how will one objectively show that they fully understand the consent in the case of a legal battle? Is it not a case of their word against the researcher's words?
Please note that everything you do in a research is documented. Everything you do in a research is documented. I repeat, everything you do about research is documented. What you get is not verbal. What you have is a form that you explain to the participant. Okay, so what am I doing? I do this. I explain everything. I want to check for understanding. It is there. I write it because it's a process. Remember, everything is documented. It's a process. You have your manual of operating procedures. You have your standard operating procedures and all that. So there's a check. For this procedure, you must check for this. These are the questions you had. Remember, I talked about standardization. You don't wake up and decide to ask your own questions. The trial has listed the kind of check questions to ensure the understanding of the key concepts. And so the form must be there. Once you ask a question and the participant, you check it, or if you have to write what is said or what your determination is checked. Of course, whoever is doing it is trained and there's evidence to show that this person has received training to be able to do this appropriately. I have been involved in clinical trials. They must get certification for everything they are doing. That's why I said it's a big deal. You can't use your money to do clinical trial. So there's training and retraining and retraining, not just training once at the beginning. If you have a nurse recruited, there must be evidence that this nurse has the research license, has all the annual license, all the doctors recruited are licensed. They are taking GCP training. that shows that they have competency on GCP and they are licensed and it's in their files. If this person is trained to understand, to take the consents, they are trained and there's evidence for that training. So it's not just that you will do the consent based on the consent form. If you are doing a check of understanding, there must be the check form that says check this question. So there's a standardized. It's not that you just wake up of your caprices and start to ask the ones that you want to ask and not ask the one that you don't want to ask. So you have the checkbox and you're checking it, okay? During a legal battle, now has to face, of course, about understanding. Understanding is about questioning. If the person is now quizzed about the research and the person on the stand cannot answer, and like I said, I've seen it, there's my therapeutic misconception. A patient that consistently, if when you're doing your check questions, shows that there's therapeutic misconception, you can't recruit that person. So if you're a recruiting person, if you have been doing your check before a legal battle happens, you would have seen that this person has therapeutic misconception. Is assuming that the therapist they have is actually treating rather than understanding that it's an experimental thing. So you would have corrected it because your check would have shown that there's an error. If you don't check and they go to you go to the legal case and the person can show beyond a reasonable doubt, please know that the legal battles also have their own systems of being objective. They're not also subjective. Doing everything is not perfect. So these are the things, documentation. I think I said it before and I'm repeating it, documentation. Stringent documentation. That's what happens in clinical trials. If you have gone, I must confess that I appreciate that there's very limited places I've gone, but from the few things I've seen around, people don't do things properly. I went to a site in Kenya where I went to study, the piece of work on clinical trials, and believe me, we are nowhere close to what they're doing. It is solid documentation. It is everything. It's a whole, like a production line. And you know where you keep the files? If the fire is burning, that file cabinet cannot burn. And it is stored like in a library. The file cabinet cannot burn. That is where it's stored. Not this one that you collect data and you enter into people's offices and you can be picking up the forms on the floor of a researcher. It's crime. Any documentation you do, including the forms, you must keep it in a cabinet, a metal cabinet that is under lock and key. Your laptop for your research is independent, that is storing patients' data, is independent of the one that you use to work, and it must be passworded. That is the level of confidentiality we're talking about. But we don't do it here. We don't do it here. We do so many things that is wrong. And of course, our legal systems are weak, so we don't have people going to. If you are in a country where everybody is going at everything, going to court, you will do the right thing. So we're not doing the right things. And sadly, many of us don't have the examples of the right things. So we don't even know what this is about. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes.
Over to you.
Yeah, we still have some couple of questions. I don't know. Should we go for the case discussion or we should take a few more?
I think let's answer the questions and then.
Okay. So the next question is, how do we document a situation where a participant decides to opt out of the research? I mean, how do you do
the standards? Yes, the standards. There, things are. It's about. The standards for all those things. Even if you go to Global Health Trials Network, all the documentation processes are there. It's a lot of documentation. So there are standards about how to document these things, what it means to write, how to put it in the case note, how to even develop the case notes, how to label the case notes for each. It's not called case notes. It's called they don't call it something. Sorry, it slipped my mind. There's a way they call it case reporting form or something. For every participant. Yes, there are documentations and everything must be there. In fact, when you develop the case reporting form for or participants, you find out that all the documents so if I am going to run this trial for 2 years and this participant is going to come for 6 visits, every single document for this person is already in that file, that folder, so that you're not missing everything. It's not like you're going to go and look for the form somewhere, bring me this PCV form, and you're looking for it. No, in that person's form, everything is there. With each visit 1, these are the things you must fill. These are the things that are possible. visit 2, visit 3, visit 4. All the documents are there so that you don't miss out on anything, including the informed consent, the reconsenting, or the information sharing, and what you're checking, and then you're checking it if this has happened or not. It's there. It's properly done. There are standards for these things. It's like asking me, the standards for getting a driving license. There's a standard. I appreciate that we don't do the right things, but there are standards. There are things you must know. You must do this test. You must check this one. There are standards for you to get a driving license. So that's how thorough it is. Yes, over.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Ma. Quadri Folorunsho wants to know that, given all that we've said, is it even possible for an undergraduate researcher or ECR, early career researcher, to engage or collaborate in clinical trial research?
Of course, it's about you. Of course, if you're an early career researcher or undergraduate, you must have a supervisor. The supervisor must be competent, and it's the supervisor that takes the legal liability over you. That's the big thing about your supervisor. So when you're undergraduate or early career researcher, meaning you're doing your master's or your PhD, the supervisor takes the legal, is the person that takes the legal coverage. So the supervisor, when you're filling any form, there's a supervisor. So the supervisor is the liable person, and the supervisor must be able to lead and provide leadership for the clinical trial. Over.
Okay. Ido wants to know if there's a difference between anonymized and de-identified data. I guess based on
I think
the
it's the same thing. I don't know that English, but I am assuming it's the same thing. Please check the dictionary. But my assumption is that it's the same.
He's making reference to what I tabbed. Actually, the little difference is that for de-identified data, you can re-identify. You can, just like you explained during the course, that you have the back record which you can go back to. But in anonymized, there is no way you can
track it.
You can track it. So yeah.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
So Ezekiel wants to know. He or she thanked you and wants to know more on therapeutic misconception as it relates to COVID-19 vaccine during the epidemic.
I think that's a major thing. Well, the COVID-19 vaccine used during the epidemic was very clear. During pandemics, there's something called emergency use authorization. So within the COVID-19 pandemic, death was occurring. And therefore, the vaccines that were licensed for use had not completed the full spectrum of research. I think most of them were in their phase 2, and then they were rolled out. Can just mute? Thank you. All right. So the vaccines were in their phase 2 clinical trial. They were licensed for emergency use by the WHO and by every authorization body. None of them came into public use without the deauthorization, because we were in a pandemic and we needed something to control that pandemic. We couldn't wait for another 5 or 3 years before everything following the normal process. Having said that, many people, or most people who took the vaccine, did not know they were in experimentation. Okay. So yes, there was the liability that the vaccines were still under trial use, though it was emergency use, without them participants without people taking the vaccine knowing that they had not completed the full spectrum therapy. I'm hesitating in discussing this because I have not fully studied the ethical, if there's consenting with emergency drug use authorization. And you can give me time to come back to the platform to discuss this. I'm not sure it's a therapeutic misconception thing, because consenting wasn't given. So putting therapeutic misconception synonymously with the COVID vaccine used during the pandemic may not be the right way to go, because there was no information provided about the fact that they were, for most people didn't understand this emergency authorization use, blah, blah, blah. But let me come back to explaining what consenting means when you are distributing a therapy that is only under emergency use authorization, which means the full spectrum of experimentation had not been done. I'll get back to the platform on that. Thank you. Excellent question. Over to you, Kudus.
Thank you, Ma. So there's this other question on research that involves computer-aided drug discovery and design. Is clinical trial applicable to this kind of study? I don't know
Every
if you
single
get
study, every single drug trial will have to go through clinical trials. You have to determine its efficacy in real life. I'll come back to look and understand what computer-aided drug discovery and design is, but you must establish efficacy in humans by doing human trials. And if it's for animals, you must establish efficacy. So yes, there's always a place for clinical drug trials. Yes.
Okay, Ma. Thank you, Ma. There is this interesting question from Oluwatoyin Olalemi. The question is this: there is this fear that when you give full details about studies, there are some risk. There's a high probability that you will not get anyone to consent. Is there a way you can give all the full information of your study and you still get people to consent without inducement? Any training on this?
Two things. Who's afraid? Is it the participant or the researcher? Number two, ethics has existed. No, just leave it. I'm not I'll definitely it's the researcher that is afraid, it's not the participant. So why are they afraid if what they are doing is clean? If what you are doing is clean and right, what are you afraid of? Number two, ethics and full disclosure has been going on for ages, 10, 20, 50 years, and people are conducting their studies. So is this an assumption that all the people that have successfully completed their studies don't give full disclosure? So I think the fear is unfounded. If you have done the right thing and the ethics committee has approved what you should otherwise approve, your study will go on as it otherwise will. And like every issue of every study, the recruitment is always slow at the beginning. And then it tapers. You find out that by the time you're closing, because the studies, what happens is that participants refer themselves. That's what happens. If your study is good and clean, participants will refer themselves. And you find out that at the tail end of the study, you now find so many people wanting to come, but because you've met your study inclusion, your number is delayed, but it's a normal phenomenon. When you start, it is slow. It is slow. So when you do clinical trials or any research, you must understand the precedents. But for you to hide information in the name of trying to recruit participants, or you do not give full details, is a crime. Simple, black and white. The researcher is a criminal. It's not about you. What your research is doing is generating information for the world. If at the end of your research, you do not recruit a single participant, that is your study finding. Now, this type of research, you will not recruit any participant, even though you do this, you change, you do this. This is the finding. But when the research is about you and you, that is when people start to do crooked things. If you understand the research is about finding the truth and it's about social value, it's about the individuals, then the research is designed to do what it should do. Now, every finding is a finding. Every finding is a finding. Currently, I'm on the field trying to recruit participants. I've done this is my third time of doing population level study, but I'm going to write it that look, when you are working with low communities, low literate communities, privacy is an issue. To obtain privacy, there was one that we were doing the consenting. We removed the mother from the child. The in-law of the woman went to where the research was and was interfering. Would the woman now say, my in-law cannot be there? How do you as a researcher, move the in-law away? Because the in-law feels he or she has a right. In fact, was in this question you're asking. The next thing now you ask, how many times did she poo-poo? How many times did she woo? To find a way of getting it, but he did not leave. And the woman cannot take the person away. So this is the cultural context. So what you find on research is an answer in itself. But that you taper information because you want to recruit is a crime. We do many things that we do not know and understand. But when we know, it's important that we move away from it. Consenting would not take away from participant recruitment. Consenting would not and would not deter you from reaching your study participant number, knowing that your design has taken cognizance of the length of the period, knowing how many recruitment happens per day based on your studies of past experimentation, your fallout rates, therefore the number of participants you reach, the length of time you need for recruitment, appropriate recruitment. The research has taken care of all this. And the ethics committee has ensured that the risk of this research is minimal and benefit is maximal. And you, the researcher, has trained your staff in the way that they consent and deal with participants. Once all this environment is right, it might take time, but you will recruit your participants. And like you noted, it's about training. You train and retrain, and your training is not once. Your staff is trained and retrained and retrained, and you will get your participant. I can tell you that you will get your participant. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Kudus. We have 4 more minutes.
Yes, we have one more question. So, Samson Okoleye, I think he has put in down his question. He asks that he once worked with Hospital Management Board in the North, where they recruited and they monitor people with HIV and tuberculosis. They give free treatment and drug as well. And they have a register where all information and health status are monitored. He's asking if he needs to seek their consent before using such data. He also added that they collect data from them weekly and they usually show up as well. They submit the register to the state monthly with follow-up as well. Still conversing whether it needs consent before using such data.
Excellent question. Patients' data that are used for treatment, when you want to turn it to research data, you have to seek consent. Because when they came, they did not give their data for research, they gave their data for treatment and management. In effect, there are 2 things I say. When you're doing this kind of program, I can assure you it's a donor program. I can tell you, I can bet it is one donor that is doing a PEPFAR or Global Fund. I keep encouraging people that when you're doing these things, because many times you don't know, and you would end up at the same time doing research, collect ethics clearance from the beginning when you're doing this project and renew it, because many times you end up wanting to use the data. But when you now want to change from clinical to research, you have to consent the patient for the use of the data for experimentation. I'll share with you 2 books for your reading that looked at the story of Ella, the history of Ella, and what those things do. You never know when legal things will occur, or whether legal things will occur or not. We have to do the right thing. So yes, sir, you have to go back, write approval, write the protocol for secondary use of this data for research. And because the data collection at that time was not de-identified, you will have to seek consent for the use of the data for the participants. Thank you for the patients. Thank you. Over.
Okay, a question just came in. She's Adenike Kadri is asking, how many weeks is it normal for a training intervention?
I think that's an excellent question. Actually, the training, depending on the length of the training, ideally you do training and retraining, training and retraining. Anytime also, just like routine things that happen, you start to notice what might be going wrong or right. Usually at the beginning of the research, the training is usually a lot more frequent. How frequent or not, I am not sure I have the competency to determine that, but I do know that the training at the beginning is usually a lot more frequent, because you would also see errors because they're just starting, and you will train the consent person, you will train the data collectors, you train those in pharmacy about documentation. It's a lot of training. But if I want to advocate black and white, how frequent the training is, about every 3 months, you train and retrain. The first intensive training can happen every 2 weeks or every 1 month and ensure all certification, everybody's all at par with the understanding. You can then go on for every 3 months. If it's a 3-year study, maybe by year 2, you are now do refresher training every 6 months. This is what in my top of my head I would otherwise say. But yes, training must definitely come as need appear. Once you're seeing there's a consistent form of error within the trial, it's appropriate to do training for those set of people. You can train on the job, you can send them out to train, you can organize training in the institution, but training must continue to happen. Thanks for that excellent question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We're
We're
on top of the
hour. Yeah,
Yes.
over to you.
So do we take the
No, any other question? Let's take it to the platform. We're top of the hour here. Let's keep our time. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
All right, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. All right, that marks the end of the 4th lecture of this lecture series. Thank you for your time and participation in this course. We'll continue the conversation on the WhatsApp platform. Do have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everyone. If there are any questions, please just bring it to the platform. Have a good day. Bye.
Happy New Year in advance, Ma, and Mr. Kudus, Dr. Kudus. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Maro. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful New Year in advance.
This
Yes.
privilege. You too, man.
And you too, Ma.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wish
Bye,
you the
everyone.
same.
Bye.
Yeah, man.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bless you.
Thank you, Ma.